And now it's a pleasure for me to introduce a fellow board member, Dr. Tom Gohl. Tom joined the board at the same time that I did, and you see in his in the bio that he's a professor of sociology at UC Berkeley. What's not there is that he is the recipient of the UC Berkeley 2007 Distinguished Teaching Award, and he serves on the editorial board of many scholarly journals, and he's quite frankly a scholar activist. He is someone you probably will run into at SFO, like I did last year when he was coming back from a conference in Japan. And like Dan, he's a very community-minded guy. He also really thinks that there are certain things that he's obligated to do as a professor and just as a citizen. So he's on the board of the National Committee on China-U.S. Relations. He is a member of the board of the Asian Society of Northern California. And he's also on the board of the East Bay College Fund that gives scholarships and provides mentors to Oakland Unified School District graduates who attend a four-year college or university.
I would also like to thank all of the attendees for taking time out and coming over so early on a foggy morning to participate in this seminar, and also very much thank the organizers, Paul, Lucille, Grace, Allison, so on, Sandra, for the extraordinary amount of effort that they put into organizing this program. Last year, for those of you who were here, I told you that my daughter was entering 9th grade high school, and one of her the person who ended up teaching her Russia, China, and India was a member of our seminar, and I was glad to hear when I looked over her homework and talked to her about what she was discussing that there had been some payoff from what she had, the teacher had heard. That teacher just had a baby, so he's not here, not joining us this year. My daughter's entering 10th grade now. I'm pleased to say she got through 9th grade. So I'm very, very much concerned with the issue of education in high school, and as Dan said, the importance of understanding China because we're all so much now deeply intertwined in this global world. This year we picked the topic of the environment and sustainability as the hook for getting across a great deal of information about China. And issues of environment and sustainability pretty much run through virtually anything you can talk about dealing with China, and some of the lists that Dan mentioned is very relevant here. Today's presentations are going to deal mostly with setting the historical political context for understanding a lot of these environmental and sustainability issues, though our final presentation this morning will look at the energy issue. Tomorrow we'll delve more deeply into the specific topics related to the environment and sustainability. Now, I have to warn all of you and all of the members of the panel, our lives are committed to China, to understanding China, and to explaining China to other people. We all have way too much information that we want to convey. And each of us, those of us who are academics, are going to condense about a semester's worth of information into a 20-minute presentation. So I speak too quickly anyway. I try to start slowly, but I end up rushing through whatever I'm going to talk about. So I would ask all of us, including myself, to observe the time limit and to try to keep it between 20 and 25 minutes. And Sandra in the back, she's not showing it right now, but has signs of the time. So please, I have a hook underneath here, and I hope I don't have to use the hook, or that Sandra doesn't have to use the hook on me. I would also like to mention that in addition to tomorrow's speakers who have come today, we also have a number of guests who are also deeply involved in U.S.-China relations through education, through nonprofit, through business. And they will be available today and hopefully tomorrow to also share information with us. So what I want to do in my presentation this morning, I have three major parts. One is try to get across the idea that China is not a monolith. We talk about China this, China that. But China is extremely diverse. In America, we tend to think America is so diverse, nobody could possibly understand how complex American society is. China is also extremely diverse, extremely complicated. So that's the first point, first takeaway I want to give. The second is to go quickly to introduce key elements of China's political system, which I think are relevant for understanding a lot of the issues we'll be talking about. And the third is to raise this idea of China's quest for wealth and power, which has been going on for over 150 years now. Okay, so to plunge into this, in the question of China not being a monolith, I want to raise a number of ways in which I think it's important for us to understand diversity in China. The first is geography. How many have been to China in the group? Oh, well, this is really maybe too obvious. But if you've been to China, and whenever people are going for the first time, I stress how important it is not to go just to Beijing or Shanghai, but how important, or Guangzhou, but how important it is to try to travel at least north and south and possibly coast and interior, because you realize a lot of not only the diversity, but the challenges that are faced by the Chinese people and the Chinese leadership. How difficult it is to formulate policies, especially in a one-party, top-down kind of system that can be applied to a country of such complexity. The north is arid, lacks water, the staple food is wheat. The south, by contrast, is humid, there's too much water, and the staple is rice. The north, the problem is how do we access water for agriculture, for industry, for human consumption? And the south, the question is how do we get rid of so much water that we've got, but also maintain and also keep the water clean for all of the various uses that we need it for. The interior of China is, here I'm making broad generalizations, generally thought of as people there, the culture more inward-looking, more conservative, whereas the coastal areas, such as Shanghai, Guangzhou, people tend to be more outward-looking, more cosmopolitan, more willing to engage with global society. And in addition to that part of core China, we have the Chinese borderlands, which is the home to many of China's 55 ethnic minorities. So this is another element of diversity, is ethnicity. Short, 92% of the population in official statistics comprises the Han ethnicity. And there are 55 other official minority ethnic groups of varying sizes. But it's important to remember that there's a great deal of diversity among the Han as well, both physical and cultural. In particular, issues of dialects and accents among the Han. And one of the main challenges that has been faced by Chinese governments is getting everybody to speak and understand the same language. So Mandarin is the official language, but when you travel around China, you realize that there's a great deal of complexity in the accents and the dialects that people use. There's also diversity in China concerning traditions and belief. We tend to talk about Confucianism as being equal to Chinese tradition. Chinese tradition equals Confucianism, but it's much broader than that. Confucianism is not a religion. Confucianism is a philosophy of social order. You can see that the Chinese for over 2,000 years have been obsessed with the question of social order. How do we maintain order? How do we avoid chaos? How do we keep our country together? This is not something new. Confucianism is a philosophy of social order. It's based on hierarchies of age and gender in particular. Everybody is supposed to know his or her place in the social order, and there is appropriate, highly ritualized behavior attached to every social role. Confucius was a great sociologist. He really understood the issue of status and role. Confucianism emphasizes harmony. The golden mean is trying to avoid extremes. Officials are supposed to be upright exemplars of morality. And Confucianism also emphasizes the importance of education. Confucianism is not, China is not a caste society. It's a society where education is seen as the main channel for mobility, and it is open to everybody. But education has not stressed innovation, creativity, follow your own muse. Education has been based on orthodoxy. And one of the challenges that the government faces now and has faced for a very long time is how do we balance the need to have some sort of a standard, an orthodox ideology that everybody can accept, and at the same time stimulate creativity and innovation, especially if we're going to meet the challenges of global society. One issue that I didn't put down there, but that I think is also important given the news from yesterday, is the belief in the mandate of heaven. That there is this concept that heaven, which is not God, that it's an abstract concept, grants legitimacy to the emperor, to the leadership, to govern the country as long as they are indeed moral. But if they are corrupt, if they are incompetent, if they are brutal and venal, then this will open the door to mass uprisings which can overthrow the leadership, showing that they've lost the mandate of heaven and a new dynasty can take their place. And one of among the many signs and portents of the loss of the mandate of heaven, the loss of legitimacy, is natural disasters. And yesterday there was a major earthquake in Yunnan in southwest China. And I'm not saying that that indicates that the communists have lost the mandate of heaven. But believe me, there are certain people in China who, when there are these major natural disasters, the idea does occur to them. So the mandate of heaven, I think, is still something that is an important concept. Another main stream in Chinese philosophy or Chinese tradition is legalism. We tend to think of Confucianism emphasizing harmony, the golden mean, people working out their problems. But more important, I think, throughout Chinese history has been the legacy of legalism, which says you don't rely on people to work out their issues. You need a strong central authority willing to use brutality in order to bring about social order. And certainly Mao Zedong was much more of a follower of legalism than he was of Confucianism. A third important philosophical strain has been Taoism, and you probably know there's a number of different romanization systems for converting Chinese sounds into Roman letters. So sometimes Taoism used a T, sometimes a D. I won't go into that. But Taoism emphasizes the idea of yin and yang, that there are extremes, and that when something reaches an extreme, it will lead into its opposite. This also relates to the idea of harmony and of balance. Taoism, also elements of Taoism are egalitarianism, spontaneity, and a link to folk religions. Important in the religious sense is Buddhism. Buddhism came from India, and Orthodox Buddhism blended with Taoism to create Chinese-style Buddhism, which is referred to as Chan, and in Japan we know it as Zen. And this is the dominant form of popular Buddhism in China, Japan, Korea, whereas the more Orthodox Buddhism went down to places like Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and Myanmar. Buddhism emphasizes ideas of reincarnation, the idea of karma, of accumulating karma, through doing good deeds so that you'll be reincarnated as something better in your next life. But related to our topic for this workshop is that Buddhism also emphasizes harmony with nature. Part of the idea of accumulating good deeds is to not harm nature and to be in harmony with nature. Now, in practice, I've talked about these different kinds of beliefs, but in practice, Chinese combine all of them. And it's generally said that when Chinese pretty much all become Buddhists on their deathbed, because or as they get older, because they're worried about have they done enough good deeds, and what are they going to be reborn as in their next life. But you also have a long tradition, but especially now, a rise of foreign religions, Christianity, Catholicism, and Islam. And we certainly know from the news that Islam is growing very quickly in China, and the Chinese leadership is very concerned about the potential for Islamic terrorism in their far western regions. Another, a fourth and final fourth but not second to last aspect of this diversity is developed and underdeveloped. For those of you who've been to China, you fly into the airport in Beijing, you fly into the airport in Shanghai. These are state-of-the-art airports, and then you can get on new freeways and maglev trains and high-speed railways and highways and so on, and you see very developed infrastructure. You can see cutting-edge architecture, high-tech zones, top universities and think tanks. But at the same time, much of China is still very, very underdeveloped. There are remote areas with little development or infrastructure, poor education, poor facilities. They don't have the students who come to the Bay Area for summer language programs. These are areas where there's still a great deal of poverty and underdevelopment. You have dense urban populations in cities under constant renovation. China's cities are constantly rebuilding, which for people who are concerned with preservation and architecture and history can be quite frustrating. Why do you keep tearing everything down? Why don't you preserve it? But the Chinese see it's important to keeping up with global trends, keep modernizing. But at the same time that you have this development, you have a rural population which ranges from suburban farmers who live a very comfortable lifestyle to some of the very remote, extremely poor areas in particular in the interior, but also in mountain areas and even in some areas not far from the cities. And a final aspect of diversity is inequality. This is for those of us who went to China in the 1970s. One of the things that struck us was the egalitarianism, how equal everybody seemed to be. Poor, but a great deal of egalitarianism. You go to China now and the inequality is quite striking. There's an emerging middle class, which many people are quite interested in, how to market goods to the middle class. But at the same time, there are obvious extremes of very wealthy and very poor people across the country and within the cities. You do see now increased slum areas within so many of China's cities. Some parts of China are very plugged into global trends and society through the internet, through travel, through study abroad, and you have other areas which are quite isolated, quite unplugged in to global community. Though it does seem that mobile phones are ubiquitous. It seems that no matter where you go, somebody's got a mobile phone, no matter how poor the infrastructure. Now to talk a bit about the political system, this is of course a very complicated issue, and I can only skip over it here. But since the establishment of the People's Republic of China, October 1st, 1949, China's been a one-party state led by the Communist Party. The party conceives of itself as a vanguard party. The Communist Party knows what's best for the Chinese people. It very much derives from the legalist system, of legalist philosophy of top-down, the party knows best, we will not tolerate dissent, and you must follow us. In theory, the Chinese Communist Party recruits the most talented, dedicated, and forward-thinking people in the country. But we know from the corruption crackdown, which is making front-page news in our newspapers now, major issue in China, that not everybody joins the party to be dedicated to this and to be selfless and committed to the goals of the Communist Party. The leadership is centralized, hierarchical. There's party leadership in every governmental, social, educational, cultural, and major economic organization. There's very little space for autonomous organizations, what we think of as civil society. Organizations like the 1990 Institute would attract suspicion. Why do you want to organize and why do you want to bring people together to have an organization? Why don't you look to the Communist Party to organize and to lead this group? The Communist Party insists on a monopoly on truth and intolerance of dissent. They are adamantly opposed to the idea of a separation of powers, such as is core to the United States, and to the idea of an independent judiciary. The initial revolutionary goals of establishing an egalitarian system led by the party have now been replaced, in the name of the proletariat or the working class, has now been replaced by the goals of modernization and national strength. And this brings me to my final topic, is the quest for wealth and power. This is a theme that has been running through Chinese history for the last 150 years. Those of you who teach Chinese history know about the mid-19th century Opium War and how this began what the Chinese have called the century plus of humiliation. As China, which had conceived of itself as equal to civilization, was defeated by foreign barbarians of a new type, not the kind of minority, people who are now minority ethnicities in China, but barbarians from the West, and then barbarians from Japan, which China had always seen itself as superior to the Japanese, and now the Japanese defeated the Chinese in 1894-1895 Sino-Japanese War. The 120th anniversary of the war was last week, and there's been a great deal of talk in China once again about beating the drumbeat of the way that the Japanese have never given up their goal of conquering China. So the Chinese adopted, at least from the top, this idea of self-strengthening to defend themselves. But it's raised the question of how to adopt Western technology while retaining a Chinese essence. Much of Chinese history, not only beginning with the communists, but throughout the end of the 19th and through the 20th century, has been a search for a development model. and I don't have time to go into that. The PowerPoints are available through Box, I believe. We see a trend of a plan leading to the market. And these are trends. China has a marketizing society. It has a society with diverse ownership. Instead of the state owning everything, we now have the growth of a private sector. And even state enterprises now must act in the market. And one of the most important trends has been China's shift from self-reliance to being increasingly engaged in the global economy. And Dan's slides emphasize that to a great degree. The Chinese leadership refers to this as socialism with Chinese characteristics. And they have achieved remarkable things in a very, very short period of time, since the reforms began at the end of 1978. Rapid progress on the road to wealth and power, the second largest economy in the world, bringing hundreds of millions out of poverty. Again, Dan has talked about a great deal of this. Removing many of the barriers to innovation, creating an environment conducive to individual autonomy and self-empowerment, redressing many historical wrongs. The Chinese are very proud of the way that they've stood up to the West and Japan, and they're spreading their model to much of the rest of the world. The Chinese claim to be engaged in a peaceful rise, though, again, from reading the paper, we can see that many of China's neighbors, in particular in Southeast Asia, but also Japan, and this is an issue of discussion in the United States, is China really engaged in a peaceful rise, and does China have other sorts of motivations behind this idea of this quest for wealth is one thing, but what does it mean? What does power mean? The Chinese leadership under the new regime of President and Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping talks a lot about the Chinese dream, which is a combination of a dream of national rejuvenation with the individual's fulfillment of his or her own aspirations, that these are mutually reinforcing. When individuals become wealthy and powerful, then the nation will be wealthy and powerful, and these will help each other. The leadership is obsessed with stability and national unity, as I mentioned earlier, very much opposed to this idea of separatism. And when they're worried about Tibet, about Xinjiang, which is the far west, about Taiwan. There have been a lot of demonstrations recently in Hong Kong, which they're very concerned about, and much less so in Macau, but also there's been stirrings of political unrest in Macau as well. So the government is quite concerned with preserving national unity and stability. Sovereignty is sacred, and they're very much opposed to this idea of anybody interfering in their internal affairs. Now, all of this quest for wealth and power has had remarkable achievements, but one of the themes we'll be stressing later today and throughout tomorrow is the cost of this to the environment much more broadly conceived. So with that, I will end my introductory remarks and turn it over to our next speakers. Thank you very much.